So to give you an example of those externally generated projects in the case of the Arab world, which are, in this case, to give a particularly valid example, I think, extremely well-intentioned. So that we're not talking here about some kind of colonial project that, or civilizing mission in the kind of explicit sense, but we're talking about a group of Americans in this case who are very well-intentioned and actually quite well-respected. This particular project, recent project called Global Americana Institute, has people involved in it like Juan Cole, who is a very respected specialist in Middle East studies and in Arabic studies, somebody who has really championed the cause of Arabs in many respects. So he's not a colonial person who's trying to invade the Arab world, if you like. So even in the case of a well-intentioned project like this, you can see what's happening. This is a project that is about choosing a set of English texts to be translated into Arabic, and they subsidize these translations and undertake them themselves. And this is how they explain it. They say the classics of American thought and history have been little translated into Arabic. We have therefore begun a project to translate important books by great Americans and about America into Arabic, and to subsidize their publications so that they can be bought inexpensively. We intend to have all the founding fathers translated, Madison, Franklin, Washington, Paine, and so on. We would also like to see works that treat issues in democracy and multiculturalism, as well as engaging histories of the United States. So this is about a group of people who believe they know what is right for that region, and they are going to export the right kind of knowledge for that region. By contrast, what is actually happening from within the region is quite different, and there's I don't know if some of you may know of this organization. There's an organization funded by Soros. I don't know if you know Soros, the guy who made a lot of millions out of the stock exchange crash several years ago, and he has been using his money to support all kinds of projects around the world. And one of them is called the Next Page Foundation. The Next Page Foundation encourages and supports translation and various types of exchange between East and East, rather than East and West or North and South, between East and East, for example, between Romanian and Arabic, for example, rather than between Romanian and English, or Arabic and English, or Arabic and French, and so on. And the Next Page Foundation, among the many other things that they do, they conducted a detailed study of publishing practices in the Arab world, and this is how they explain what they think is happening. They say, on domestic publishing in the Arab world, the prevailing attitude in the design of translation projects is that it is good to know about the outside world rather than that it is necessary to promote the transfer of knowledge in certain areas to confront development issues in the Arab world. So the internally generated projects are about just knowing, interacting with the world, rather than transferring knowledge in order to develop the area. This development framework is a very strong framework for organizing discourse about the Arab world, and you have all kinds of human development reports that come out repeatedly that tell you, about the gender issues in the Arab world, the treatment of women, translation, all kinds of things, all done within this development framework. Whereas the stuff that is coming out from the Arab world itself is not about the development, it's about just gaining knowledge about the world, right, good or bad. Okay, so the next little problem, just before I actually show you examples of how translators and publishers negotiate this paradox that we talked about, has to do with how we define political text. And I have to say that I don't have a reliable definition of political text, and it's a very, very difficult issue to deal with, because the problem with defining political text is that apart from those texts that we automatically think of as political, for example, a political speech or a text about the politics of the kind of governance and so on, the problem take on political significance in a particular context. So, for example, in the context of the Arab world at the moment, the Arab world, of course, one of the very, very big political issues for all Arabs is the conflict with Israel. And of course, the language in Israel is Hebrew, and this conflict is defining a lot of events and developments within the region. Within this context, any kind of translation from Hebrew is automatically a political act. Even if you are translating literature, even if you are translating poetry, that novel, that poem becomes a political text, because even literature can be infused with certain values that in a given context assume political significance. And so in the case of Hebrew literature, it will be, even a novel will be infused with Zionist values, and that is part of the conflict in the area. In the same way that, for example, during the Nazi regime in Germany, of course, there was a lot of literature produced. I mean, the Nazi regime wasn't all about war and so on. At the same time as war was going on, they were also producing literature, and that literature was infused with Nazi ideology. You couldn't separate the literature from the political developments in the area, and therefore translating a piece of Nazi literature makes it political, because it is produced in a particular cultural environment where the issues of conflict that defined the era were very much evident in any kind of linguistic or other type of production. So the point here is that although I'm going to give you examples of texts that are clearly political in the kind of traditional sense, any kind of text can be approached from this perspective if it is likely to be infused with certain values that take on political significance in a given context, cultural context. Okay. Here are some examples of the areas where, in and around the text, where, and I'll show you concrete examples in a minute, where translators, publishers, editors, and all those who are involved in producing the translation can exercise their can have their own voice and say things in their own voice and do things in their own voice, at the same time as claiming that the text has been given to the reader as it is without mediation. The text has been left as it is, but through things like introductions, the images on the front page of on the cover of the front cover, the footnotes by translators are often, and I'll show you examples in a minute, extremely interesting. All these are areas that are quite separate from the area of the author, where the author's voice is kept more or less intact, and where the translator, publisher, and so on can exercise their own initiative. That said, it doesn't mean that where you have interventions in footnotes, in introductions, and so on that surround the text, that this necessarily means there will be no intervention in the text itself. Often there is as well. Often translators and publishers and so on will intervene in the area around the text, and then there will also be subtle changes in the text itself that help to serve a particular agenda. I'm going to start with an example of, just so you see the difference in the kinds of things that go on, an example of a text which really poses no problem at all in the target context here, because it is a text that is very much in tune with the values of the receiving culture, the dominant values of the receiving culture, and with the receiving culture's own view of America in this case. I don't know if some of you may be familiar with this book. It's a bestseller. Michael Moore is an American author who has produced a lot of books in which he criticizes American foreign policy. And this is probably the best known of these books. It's called Stupid White Men and Other Sorry Excuses for the State of the Nation. Now, translating a book like this into Arabic poses no problem and requires no major intervention on the part of the translator and publisher and so on, because it is already reinforcing views and values that are current in the target culture. So I have, of course, bestsellers like this often come out in several different editions, and often each edition has a different cover. However, I've looked at all the editions as far as I can see of this particular book, and none of them has this cover that you can see in Arabic. And that in itself is kind of strengthening the message in the original. It shows the American flag with lines that look like prison bars, and I don't know if you can see from a distance, but it looks like the ends of the flag are frayed, so it's like in tatters essentially. So that's kind of strengthening the message a bit. The title is left more or less as it is. All that has happened is that the title, the main title is as it is, Stupid White Man, and up the top the subtitle is literally The Other Face of America. Very little intervention, really, not much. So this is not to show that something major is happening. This is just reinforcing the values that are already current in the target culture. Here's another example of a book which is by a very well-respected Middle East expert, again somebody who has championed Arab causes, very much sympathetic to Arab causes, Zachary Rothman, and it's called Contending Visions of the Middle East, the History and Politics of Orientalism. This is translated into Arabic 3 years after it appeared. And a number of interesting things happening there, not as major as the ones I'll show you later, but again we're building up to a picture where you can see the intervention on the part of the translator, publisher, and so on more clearly. This is the front cover of both the English and the Arabic books. They are identical, except that in Arabic the subtitle becomes the main title, and the main title becomes the subtitle, which is not a major thing. This is the back cover. Again, not much going on there, but as you will see later, in other cases, the back cover is where a lot of intervention is evident. This is from the translator's introduction. This one has an introduction by the translator, and the translator does interesting things in that introduction. He says, I do not hide from the reader. This is obviously a back translation from Arabic, because I assume that very few people here will have Arabic, so I'm not going to bore you with showing you the Arabic as well. This is a back translation from Arabic. It says, I do not hide from the reader the fact that I have much sympathy with this book. So this is the very first sentence, and he's already saying he has a stand. He's not neutral. He's sympathizing with this book, and he's making that clear. Perhaps because it's one of the few books that deliver a political and informational message to the American reader, but is no less, if not more important, to the Egyptian and Arab reader. And here you'll see in a minute why it's important to the Egyptian and Arab reader, not because it's necessarily going to make them better people by teaching them about democracy or about human rights. He's actually very demanding from the reader. He's not giving the reader an easy ride by just reinforcing what they want or what they see or giving them what they want. He says later, finally, I should perhaps alert the reader to the fact that the author often resorts to excessively long sentences in order to convey the complex ideas he wishes to present and to avoid any confusion. I have tried as much as I could to unpack what I thought would be difficult to follow, but on the whole I have preferred in most cases to retain the author's style, which reveals an intellect that is always concerned to include any reservations or boundaries relating to an idea with the idea itself in the same sentence. This style seems to me to be worthy of conveying to the reader as a good example of how care should be taken in articulating ideas, and how to avoid categorical statements and easy generalizations which appear attractive but have little content, and how to be patient in expressing complex ideas, all this being an aspect of the scientific spirit that has oriented this work. What the translator is doing here is, as I said, he's not giving the reader an easy ride at all. He's not just telling the reader what they want to hear. At the same time, he's not telling them you've got to be democratic, you've got to exercise human rights or whatever. What he's saying is you have to engage more intellectually. You have to make an intellectual effort. I'm not giving you an easy book, and I'm not going to make it